again the 18th chapter, beginning at the first verse. The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre, while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat so that you can be refreshed and then go on your way, now that you have come to your servant." "Very well," they answered. "Do as you say." So Abraham hurried into the tent and said to Sarah, "Quick," he said, "get plenty of fine flour and knead it and bake some bread." And then he ran to the herd and selected a choice tender calf and gave it to a servant who hurried to prepare it. He then brought some curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before the 3 angels. While they ate, he stood near them under a tree. "Where is your wife Sarah?" they asked him. "There in the tent," he said. Then the Lord said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will bear a son." Now, Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already old and well advanced in years, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, am I worn out after my master is old? Will I now have this pleasure?" Then the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Will I really have a child now that I am old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Sarah was afraid, and so she lied and said, "I never laughed." But the angel said, "Yes, you did laugh." It's a great story. So why do I use this story? Well, you can see obviously that what I have before you this morning is my rendition of Andrei Rublev's famous icon of the Trinity. And Rublev wrote this icon. Icons aren't painted, they're written. And this is a window into a reality that is transcendent. And I suspect that it was written sometime in the 1700s. Russia was undergoing enormous upheaval. Life was extremely hard. Rublev was the most accomplished iconographer of his time, and he was commissioned to write this icon for the monastery of the Holy Trinity in a town just outside of Moscow, which he did. And because it was for the monastery of the Holy Trinity, he wanted to do an icon of the Trinity, but 2 persons of the Trinity were not allowed by the science of iconography to be portrayed. Those 2 being the Father and the Holy Spirit. There were an unlimited number of icons portraying Jesus, Mary, saints, angels, and so forth, but never before had the Father and the Holy Spirit been portrayed in an icon. Now, what had been portrayed was the hospitality of Abraham. Abraham entertaining the 3 angels that came to tell Abraham and Sarah that they were going to have a child. Now, they're both well into their 90s, long past childbearing age, and they're being told that they're going to have a child. No wonder Sarah laughed. What Rublev did with the image of the three angels, is nothing short of miraculous. And that story, the hospitality of Abraham, was the actual title of this icon when Rublev first wrote it. It became, in tradition, known as the Trinity soon after it was commissioned. So this particular rendition is in needlepoint. There are 16 stitches to an inch, and I did a basic calculation that in this particular needlepoint, which is 21 by 30, there are approximately 161 stitches, 61,000, which means one stitch in the front and another one in the back, 161,000 times. So it took me a little over 2 years to do the needlepoint, and I actually took on the project because I was doing rehabilitation on the fingers that I so miraculously removed. But anyway, it took 2 years. I've had a lot of time, a lot of prayer, goes into the writing of an icon. I've thought a lot about the design and so forth. And after I was finished with it, interesting story, after I was finished, I had on a scroll. There's a scroll that it goes on so I could work it just a little section at a time. And the challenge of mounting it and framing it came after the needlepoint was done. And, although I am a little bit of a craftsperson, mounting and framing this particular icon was a little out of my league. So I took it to a friend of mine who has a frame shop. And I went down there with Sandy, and Sandy is my aesthetic consultant. She does all the colors and what would look good, and she and Alan talked a lot about, what would work and look right and all that kind of thing. And so they came up with a design for a border and a frame. And I don't know if it comes across well on the Zoom, but it's really quite lovely. And so we decided on what the border and the frame would look like, and Alan said, well, I'll shoot you a text later on with my estimate. Well, 3 days later, Sandy picked me up off the floor. I mean, it was probably 3 times higher than anything that I thought it would cost. And I don't have a lot of things framed, so I was just unaware of how expensive these things are. But I didn't have the money. And didn't know if the icon was really worth all that kind of. And I said, listen, just let me take it back. I called the frame shop. I said, let me just take it back, and I'll figure out something else and all that. And my friend said to me, he said, listen, Mac, what you've got here is really museum quality. I mean, it's really beautiful, and it's worthy of the frame. Let me go ahead, put the border, mount it, put it in a frame and all that, and then over time, just give me whatever you can, and we'll settle up that way. He said, I'll trust you for it. So I said, okay, I relented. And I went and gave him what I could afford at the time as a down payment to at least cover the material. And some weeks later, I got a call from the frame shop, it's done. Come in and get it. I had made, I think, maybe one payment, I can't remember. So I went in with Sandy to look at it for the first time and to pick it up. And of course, when they took it out of the bag, I took my breath away. I mean, I'd never seen it like that. And it really was spectacular. And so then I reached for my wallet and took out my credit card, and Alan said, it's paid for. And I said, what do you mean it's paid for? He said, an angel came into the shop and said, how much is, what's the remainder, the balance? And I'll go ahead and cover it. And I said, well, who was the angel? He said, I'm sworn to secrecy. An angel came in, I can't tell you who it was. And I said, Alan, you know damn well I'm not leaving here until you tell me. And it was my daughter. And she came in and took up the remainder. She wanted me, to have it like that. Kind of emotional. So we have these 3 characters. What do you like about it? What the icon means and what it points to is what it means to you. I would be very surprised if all of you had not at least seen a rendition of this. You know, when I go to the monastery in Carmel and you enter the chapel, there's a baptismal font as you enter, and you know you bless yourself. And right behind the baptismal font, very prominently, very large, is this icon. And I first encountered it a number of years ago, but when I saw it at the monastery, it took my breath away, and it always does. I don't know why. I mean, just something happens to me when I gaze on it. And icons are not intended to portray any kind of physical reality. They're not supposed to look like anything that we normally look at. They're supposed to point beyond themselves to a higher and greater reality, an unseen reality that becomes apparent upon the gazing. And so it's a vehicle for prayer. It's like a sacrament. You know, you eat bread and wine, but they're not bread and wine. There's something else. You know, the waters that we're baptized in, it's not water. It's amniotic fluid. It's something else. There's a reality behind it. So first impressions are important. What impresses you? What catches your eye? Well, for me, obviously it was the three angels that visited Abraham, three characters, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And, you know, what amazes me when I look at the three, and especially when I was doing the faces, was, what are they? Are they little boys? They're obviously very young. Their skin is impeccable. Are they little girls? You know, they have a look that's very youthful, and they have no facial hair whatsoever. But they also have, their faces have a profound wisdom to them. It's not unlike the wisdom that's so obvious in iconography around the Virgin. Young, yet transcendent and wise. And these three faces are all identical. The hair really is so, to me, feminine. So obviously feminine. But again, androgynous. Gender doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. And then, you know, what is their relationship to each other? Now, this is, to me, amazing. This is the magic, really, I think, of the three. These three, I mean, you can say all you want about them, but they are crazy about each other. There's a love that just welcomes me in. Now, what's interesting about the angel part, and we know they're holy in terms of the iconography because they have the nimbi, the nimbus, the golden orb around each head. But they also have these wings. And the wings, to me, they're like, they envelop all the three. And it makes the three, to me, it makes the three one. Like, there's three separate things, but they're all like, together. There's a unity in the diversity of the three. So the only really distinguishing characteristic between them, because if all you saw was the face and the hair, from the neck up, identical. And so it's the clothing. It's the clothing. This angel is wearing one thing, this angel's wearing another thing, and this angel's wearing another thing. And they're distinguished by their color. Now, in iconography, it's a really exact science. And colors have meaning. And, although this particular icon, has more of a, I don't know, is it velvet or purple or whatever, but in the original Rublev, it's much more, the hues are much more golden. Royalty, glory, glorification, power. And so we determined very quickly that the character on the left-hand side is God the Father, majestic, royal, and so forth. Now, blue is also an extremely important color in iconography, and it became very important, the cobalt color, in any stained glass window, because blue is a holy color. It signifies divinity. Now, the thing about blue is that the Holy Spirit's got some, and the Holy Spirit looks like the blue is an undergarment and that the green is on top of it. Now, the figure of the Creator, God, of course, again, it's an undergarment, and there's less of it showing and more of the glory, more of the majesty. You know, the garment really determines the holiness of the Father. Now, when it comes to blue, and this doesn't show up that well on this particular icon, but this part of the garment is brown in Rublev's original icon. And brown is what? Human, grounded on the planet, humanity. And you'll notice that the blue, divinity, is draped over the humanity. And at the will of the person in the center, which is the Christ, the blue can come and go. Holy, human, holy, human, holy, human. What is the confession of the church? Fully God, fully man. Right there. Now, what was fun to do in needlepoint, because it was so easily distinguished and easier to count, is this golden stripe that signifies a royal priesthood. A royal priesthood. He is the one that blesses the sacrifice. Now over here, this character here is draped in green. Nature, fertility, fecundity, freshness, the entire created order of verdant green life, and so forth. And right now, especially in the springtime, things exploding green. I don't know how it is in your neighborhood, but maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, when the flowers were just that's the Spirit. Animating creation. Now, you'll notice that there are 3 like staffs, that each those stand for authority and divine protection. So you have the clothing, and you have the face, the clothing which distinguishes, and the faces which unify. And then it's interesting that there's this chalice here, this golden chalice with the sacrifice. And, in the sacrifice, Rublev intended to represent the food that was brought to the angels by Abraham's servants. Representing that, the sacrifice, the appropriate sacrifice to holiness had been offered. And the 3, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, all 3 simultaneously blessing with 2 fingers. And I've talked about the 2 fingers in iconography. Jesus, I'm 2 things. I'm 2 things. I look like one thing, but I'm 2 things. I'm fully God, I'm fully man, and so are you. So you're 2 things. You're on the planet, you're in heaven. Simultaneously, they come and go in and out. Like the garments that we change, so the divinity that's within us is manifested or not. We live on that spectrum. They're all blessing this sacrifice. Now, just a couple of other things. Up in the upper right-hand corner, you have, I thought it was a fish. I thought it was a big shark jumping out of the water. And my daughter corrected me because she looked it up. That's Mount Moriah. That's Mount Moriah. That's where the temple sits. That's where Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice. That's what this whole visitation was about, the promise of Isaac, the promise of an inheritance, the promise, this is God keeping the promise, I will make you a great nation, generations will abound more than the grains of sand by the sea. This is the keeping of the promise. This is where Abraham's faith was most exemplified. Took Isaac, the only son, up on the mountain. He was to sacrifice the boy. And what is Abraham known for? Faith. This is the mountain of faith, and this is the gift of the Spirit. In the center we have, of course, the tree. Got to have the tree. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the tree of life, the tree on which Jesus was crucified. The tree always stands in the center and hangs over the sacrifice that was made on our behalf by the Christ, the tree. And then on the left, and then, all these things are open to interpretation. I'm just, coming up with, I think, makes most sense based on the research that I've done. But on the left, you have this magnificent structure here. And in different icons, this particular building takes on different architecture. Some have a fairly modest appearance, almost like a tent in front of which Abraham was sitting when the three approached him. Others look more like a home. To me, this is a temple. This is the temple where the Holy of Holies, where the God of Israel was geographically located, where the Ark of the Covenant was kept after they left the wilderness and made their way into the promised land. This is the temple, which God has now left to go out and be available to all in the world. So you have all these symbols going on, and if you notice, there's some sacred geometry. Actually, what would make sense if the whole thing, and it's also been painted, written in a circle, where this whole thing is encircled, and you can kind of see it kind of comes up and is contained like that. There's also several different triangles that are there's some sacred geometry, but I think the most important piece of sacred geometry is the octagon, 8-sided. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Octagon, 7 days of creation and an 8th day of resurrection. Creation, resurrection, 7 days plus 1, and so the octagon is sacred. The stools obviously are very important and prominent at the base. The earth. The earth is God's footstool. Now, if you kind of look, and I don't know if I can do this, but you have this one chalice, here, golden chalice, and then, but if you look, kind of coming up like this, that whole thing is a chalice, isn't it? The image is like that. And guess who's right in the center? That's our boy. Now, if you were to draw diagonals to find the exact center of the icon, bam! The heart of Christ, the heart of the icon, the heart of our lives, the heart of creation, the Christ, the universal Christ, that now, due to the power of the Spirit, lives within. Now, I want to talk about invitation. Invitation. Come on in, everybody. Have a seat. So you have these three that are seated around this table, and they're not closed to the viewing public. They're like, can see that, can see that, and they're obviously very smitten with each other. You have this figure here gazing at the sacrifice, the Son gazing at the author, the Spirit gazing, kind of coming from the Father and the Son, and have all this going on. And then, so I feel welcome. I feel like they want me to hang out, join them. And then, here's the great mystery of the icon. There's this little box here, and I don't know if you can see it either on Zoom or here, but it's actually, you can see it's actually an opening. It's actually a square kind of opening. And some people suggest that it's representative of the Ark of the Covenant. Some suggest that it's a place where relics could be kept, the bones of the saints, items from the cross, whatever like that. But there was an interesting discovery in the last part of the last century, And they determined that there was something that had been applied to the surface of the icon after its completion, and they determined scientifically that whatever was there was glue. It was glue. That something was, bam, attached to the front. Now, you can imagine what that might have been, but as I was reading this book, one of my favorite people, Richard Rohr, it's called The Divine Dance. And, oh, sorry, Nate. And The Divine Dance by Richard Rohr. And the purpose of this book, to awaken the reality of the Trinity in the life of most believers. Because most Christian believers are either monotheists, they believe in God, they're okay with God. And they're okay with Jesus a little bit, but the Holy Spirit just gets a little murky in the Trinity. Who really knows? But anyway, you'll see on the cover of this book called The Divine Dance, there's the icon right there. And again, this is the overlap, and you can see the icon right there. So Father Richard Rohr, spent a lot of time thinking about this icon. And what he suggests, and it makes sense to me, is that what was glued on there was a mirror. So as you gaze, you would gaze upon the Father and the Son and the Spirit, and you would feel their love, not only for each other, but for you. And the other image that you would see at the table with the three, experiencing love. Now, I just have to add in closing the effect that this has had on me. And the part that God plays in my life and in life. And, I'm not a biologist. I'm not a geologist. I'm certainly not an astrophysicist. But I'm curious about the nature of the physical universe. And one of the things that the quantum physicists are telling us is that at the heart of every atom, there's a vibration. There's a vibration that sustains and is within all of creation. And I'm going to call that vibration, just because it works for me, I'm going to call that love. It's love that makes the entire creation possible, holds it together, and that we, as human beings, are gifted with the experience of. And so this vibratory relationship, this generative love, is a part of and a model for all of creation. Trinity is everywhere apparent and becomes the founding of our faith. How did we start our worship? Blessed be God. Holy Spirit. There's a great story that the medieval or the early desert fathers used to tell of a king in his carriage outside of a village. And the carriage passes by an old fellow in the rain, mud, overburdened. The carriage stops and the door opens, and the king from inside, would you like a ride? And the old man says, what do I have to do for this ride? And the king said, you have to get in.
Contributions to St. Luke's Episcopal Church help to make the digital ministry and other outreach within the community possible. If If it is in your heart to make a donation, St. Luke's secure PayPal link, as well as the church's mailing information, may be found in the description of this video. Thank you.